It's the Task Management and Time Blocking Podcast, episode 14.
So you're a time blocker to some degree. This means you put tasks in your calendar, not just appointments with people, which can't easily be changed, but solo time. You commit to doing a particular task on your own. But you make a promise to yourself that no one else knows about to do something at a particular time and place. It's an easy concept to explain, but most people who seem to start the practice have a rough time taking it to the level they want. Once they get past the beginner stage, when they're experimenting with a few tasks, they want more tasks. And for a while, they schedule these more tasks and more and more and more until they have too many and their time blocking becomes a problem. It should be easy, they think, but all of a sudden it's turned into something that's not. What are some of the best solutions available once they hit this, let's call it a plateau or a ceiling? Tune into this episode to hear from me and my special guest, Mark Vardy, as we solve this challenging problem together. Welcome to the Task Management and Time Blocking Podcast. And welcome back. As you can see, we're joined by our special guest, Mike Vardy. And just before I introduce him, let me tell you a couple of things about the podcast. One is that this is a problem and solution kind of conversation where Mike has joined me to help to define the problem that I mentioned before. And then we'll switch over, almost like changing gears, and then work on some possible solutions. And as we do so, especially in the part where we're talking about solutions, we're looking to see if we can come up with some new stuff, something that's never been said before. Now, we may not get there, which is okay, but if we do, you'll hear this sound, which means that we've come up with something that we think nobody in the world has ever said before. And we could be fooling ourselves, but we're going to have fun doing it anyway. And if we get to the end of the podcast and we don't, I'll put in a buzzer that said that time ran out and we didn't come up with anything new. But so far, had a good track record. So right before I introduce Mike, let me tell you a quick story. Jose has been time blocking for about 6 months, faithfully putting all his tasks for each day right there in the calendar. Before he made the switch, he only used his calendar for appointments, like a doctor would when, like seeing patients. As soon as he began this time blocking, he noticed a huge improvement. All of a sudden, he lost the fear of losing control of his day. No, he knew exactly where he stood at any moment, whether he was executing according to his plan or not. Or at least that was on the good days. On the occasional bad day, his plan would be disrupted in the first 5 minutes by an unexpected emergency. For example, his boss could commandeer his time and direct him to do something completely unplanned. This would have a ripple effect that would last several days, and he hated this. But his company had a flaky global supply chain, and as a procurement expert, there were more days like this than ever before. Thank you, COVID. The worst moments came when he skipped time blocking for several days and would have to return to the original emergency. Then he'd move all his tasks forward one by one, a tedious process at best. That dragging and dropping as you try to move all the tasks. At worst, he'd feel like abandoning the approach, but he was wary. The idea of going back to doing mental planning was not appealing. However, there was a lifeline. He was recently offered the services of a remote assistant who could do some of his rescheduling. So he's thinking about that. And he's also aware of auto-scheduling apps like Motion and Schedpal, but he hasn't tried them. What is the best course of action? Or maybe he should just wait until the supply crisis goes away. So maybe then he could return to his former success. So let me introduce Mike Vardy. Mike is an author, speaker, and productivity and time management strategist, or productivityist, based out of Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. His company is called Productivityist, and the company's mission is to help people stop doing productive and start being productive through a variety of online and offline resources that he facilitates. He's the author of The Front Nine, How to Start a Year You Want Anytime You Want, published by Diversion Books. He's also self-published several ebooks, most recently, The Productivityist Playbook. Mike, welcome to the Task Management and Time Blocking Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Francis. I'm looking forward to this. I think I'd like to hear that nice sound happen more than the buzzer sound. So let's make it happen.
Let's make some magic happen. We'll see. It's not that the buzzer is bad. It's just that we could have a great conversation, and
sure,
we bring ideas that we already know, and if nothing new gets created, it kind of happens sometimes.
Yep.
All right, so let's talk about this time blocking problem that we've defined. So people think it's easy, and then they get a rude surprise. Does that resonate with your experience of working with clients?
Yeah, I think time blocking sounds very promising and almost like the Holy Grail in a lot of ways. Like, if I block my time, then I'll be able to get all the things that I need to and want to get done. But the problem is that, especially if you're not working for yourself like I am. I have a lot of luxury of being able to kind of create those blocks of time and not have to worry about it being commandeered, as you mentioned in the story. But when you work in an environment where the time isn't all your own, it's very hard to get incredibly specific with blocks of time on a consistent and sustainable basis. And so how do you do it in a way that allows you to maintain and sustain it, but leaving room for those emergencies or when things go wrong, so that you don't drop the ball with it altogether? It's like, biases creep in all the time. Oh, this didn't work this week, which means it will never work again. Or there's no way I can block my time because my days aren't completely under my control. We tend to, kind of exaggerate how much we can't do something over because it's change. It's difficult. So when time blocking makes things easier to some degree, it's the getting to that point that's hard. And then the maintaining it, which is even harder, especially when you talk about things like having to move things from one day to the next. People end up thinking it's more maintenance, and you spend more time moving things around than actually doing the thing. So hopefully during our conversation, we'll be able to solve some of those concerns and make it so that whether you block your time very specifically or whether you use the kind of stuff I talk about, which is theming your time, you may be able to have the best of both worlds.
Right. So that's what we're heading for, kind of a balancing of the opposites, because there's some people who they not only don't time block, they don't do any planning whatsoever. There are people who, in the morning they wake up, they reach for their phone on the nightstand, and they start checking email.
Yeah.
And their entire day depends on what their email is telling them to do, or what their instant messages are telling them to do. And that's the day.
That's a huge problem, because basically when you're saying that is you're saying what I had in mind for my day, my time is not nearly as important as the external demands. And the reason that we tend to do that is it's easier for someone else to tell us what to do than for us to tell ourselves what to do in a lot of cases, because some of the stuff that we need to tell ourselves to do is more challenging, deeper, more thoughtful work. Whereas if we're getting messages from our bosses that the 14th thing that they've given us is now the most important, is it? I mean, we have to realize that when we get demands from our colleagues, they probably aren't thinking about the things that they've already sent our way. They're just thinking about the most recent thing that they sent our way, and they're getting it out of their head and sending it to you. And then you have to decide, well, how do I work through this? And if you start your day off with no plan, if you grab your phone and you're dealing with the external demands right away, then yeah, you're already behind the 8 ball, and it's very hard to get out. It's like quicksand, right? It's very hard to get out of that. So you have to almost start from a point of, I've planned my day the night before. Or, I mean, again, and when we talk about time blocking, or again, and I'll use my example of daily theming, like when I wake up in the morning, I don't say to myself, well, I wonder what I'm going to do today. that is a terrible question because my brain will, right? It's the worst question. Instead, I say, well, what day is it? Oh, it's Wednesday. Wednesday's media day. Okay, so my overarching focus today is media tasks. Well,
Right.
let's take a look at the to-do list and see what's on there, and then orchestrate. And I think that's one of the other things we could probably get to today is how the calendar and to-do list can work together, instead of you being like, I'm a calendar person and all the things go in a calendar, or I'm a to-do list person and the calendar is just for appointments. Like, there's a way to have those integrate so that they talk to each other and they help you be your most productive self.
Right, right. So the person who I met, who was the most reactive kind of person that I'm mentioning, was a very junior member of staff. And it really came as a revelation that you could plan your day, and that your boss wants you to plan your day. Your boss doesn't want you to be a complete puppet, like a complete victim of whatever drama was happening and whatever latest, item your colleagues thought they wanted you to work on. So in a way, that the time blocking allows anyone to start or move further towards the accomplishment. The idea is to move them towards the accomplishment of their goals and intentions, and away from the pure chaos that this particular employee happened to live in. It's just that on the way from the pure chaos to full intention, there is real life, right?
Yeah.
And real life is that not only do other people have things for you, they want you to do things and they want to do them on their schedule. So there's that. But there are bona fide emergencies, and these unexpected demands cause you to have to react. And that's where the early time blocker, the novice at time blocking, they put the tasks on their calendar in the beginning, and it works, like Jose did. And then life starts to build, more items start showing up that they need to time block. They become really good at creating an 8-hour schedule, only to see it go to heck in maybe the first 10 minutes.
Yep.
And they have a choice at that moment. But there's something internal that goes on. From my talking with people, for me, it seems like a loss of confidence. Like, I'm not doing the right thing because look at all these changes that are coming in. But how would you characterize it, Mike? That's sort of that internal feeling that people have when that moment comes, they realize their time blocking isn't working the way they want it.
Well, I think part of the problem is that they get too specific right away. So they get too specific with their tasks, which is what I found when I work with people, and because most people have heard about time blocking, but haven't heard about time theming. And they're like, well, what's the difference? I'm like, well, the difference is that theming is there's a broader scope to it, right? So instead of me starting off my day with a block of time that says I'm going to record all of the intros and outros for my June podcast episodes, I don't go that specific right away, because what if I have, like, I'll give you an example. I had a particular podcast guest that said, we need this or something like that. And that got my attention first. And if I had in there, record the intros and outros between 9 and 9:30, and I don't get that done, all of a sudden the snowball effect starts to happen, like you're talking about, right? So they either get too specific with what's in the block of time, or they make the block of time too narrow to fit the thing in. So I think that's why I prefer using theming early on, especially early on, because what it does is it says, okay, today, this period of time, whether it's a day or horizontal theming is times of day, I'm going to focus on, I don't know, communication. Okay, great. That means that could be email, that could be social media, but I can't tell that person what their time block should be, what that period of time should be. Maybe they need to go narrower and say, okay, this is email time, right? So I'm going to focus on just dealing with email, not just emailing this one specific person. So I think that's the first thing, because
we're gonna talk more about theming later on when we get
Sure,
into
sure,
the
sure.
solutions. But before someone knows about theming as a solution, what's the experience for them?
The experience is, I mean, I think to that end, the experience is, I have so much to do and not enough time. So how can how am I going to, and my day is now full, and it's so that's number one. Number two is, am I doing these in the right order? Right. So am I doing them in the right order at all?
Right.
Whether it's based on the priority that people are placing on me, whether it's my body clock that's telling me to do these at the right time. Because some people are not wired to do things in the morning, and they're better suited in the afternoon. I would be an example of that versus like the morning person. So like there's a lot of variables in there, but the ultimate thing is emotions play a role. And I think that when it comes to productivity in general, we skew either too far to the emotional response. Oh, I got this thing from this person, I got to deal with it right away. Or too far to the logical. Well, hold on. This time block says that I should only be doing this. And then they focus intently on that, and they're forsaking other things. So balance doesn't just come, in the sense of work-life balance or whatever, but balance should be your approach to, I don't want to be too emotionally responsive to this, and I don't want to be too logical. I want to be like reasoned with my approach to the tasks that are going in my calendar.
So they're bouncing around
they're bouncing around between emotional responses and being too, so they tend to overcorrect. So, oh my God, this is freaking me out. And they go, okay, that's bad. Maybe I should just be completely ruthless about this and go, nope, this is the time and this is it. And I don't care what my emotions say. And they forget that they're human beings. So, so they teeter, they overcorrect to either, and they don't realize, and they don't test the waters too. They don't go, okay, well, you mentioned everything because like emergencies happen. Well, what is an emergency? Like you need to define that before you can, because if everything is an emergency, then nothing really is. And it's like when people say to me, and I don't know if you get this, Francis, but, oh man, I spent all morning putting out fires. I'm like, okay, do you know that a firefighter will let certain things burn so that they can actually strategically attack the thing that, so they'll let part of a building burn because they're like, okay, this part we can let go for a while we do this. So when people say they're fighting fires, I envision them like spraying like willy-nilly, like a fire extinguisher everywhere, or grabbing a bucket of water when it's a chemical fire and then going, oh no, or you know what I mean? Like they're not being strategic about it. And so I said, when you say I fight fires, I want to know how. Because if you're just like being very reckless and ruthless about it, then you're not taking a strategic approach. And I think that whether this problem goes beyond time blocking, but I think that's part of it too, is what is an emergency, and find out. And the only way you can do that is to ask questions internally, test waters, but then also ask questions externally. Hey, boss, what is this, like, what is an emergency? Because you get a lot of different answers on that. I mean, your answers could be really, really overt. When I say this is an emergency. We'll put it in the headline of the email, urgent, right? Or whatever. Or you'll get subtext, which is your boss saying, hey, when I'm emailing you, everything's an emergency. And that sends a completely different message. So,
and that strikes me as one of these early realizations, because when you start time blocking, all of a sudden you become hyper aware of how different life is from your expectations about life. So there's a rude surprise when you start off. It's kind of, if you had a to-do list before you started time blocking, or worse, if you just kept it in memory, you had a kind of a vague idea that was never really tested. Now all of a sudden you put something down in writing and you put a time to it, and now you can see the failure kind of talking right back to you. And all of a sudden your boss's email that never used to be a problem, his emergency emails, are now a problem. Your colleagues' emails that try to get into your schedule are now a problem. All of a sudden, all these things are problems, but they weren't problems before, because you would just kind of go, oh, well, you just surrender the day or surrender the moment, and you just give it right back. You just not have to make a hard decision. So it strikes me that when you start time blocking, all of a sudden, your intention runs into the reality that's always been there. You may think it's new, that, oh my God, they know I'm time blocking, so they're trying to ruin my day. But the truth is, you're really just aware of something that was always going on, but now you're actually accounting for it. You're not just smiling and going.
And I think the key is that before you start to allocate your time and use it, leverage it or lead it, not manage. Time moves on whether we want it to or not. That's why time management is such a crappy term in a lot of cases, because, managing it is not like, that's what I mean, think about the difference between a manager and a leader, right? Like a manager is just, you're moving pieces around, all that stuff. But when a leader wants to do more with that, right? So when you start time blocking, you are actually leading your time. But more importantly, and I think that this is the piece that you don't hear about, is I would argue that time blocks are more attention blocks than time blocks. Time is the frame, but what they do is they heighten, you talked about awareness, they heighten your attention towards your intention, which is whatever you're putting there, whether that's a very specific task, a set of tasks, a project. What you're doing is saying, these are my intentions, or this is my intention, which is why I prefer the term intention over task. Like I intend to do this. And in order to be productive, you have to say, okay, how am I going to pay attention to this? Because everybody else, like to your point, is vying for your attention. And you've been freely giving it away before, not just your time, but your attention. What a time block does, when you say from 9 till 9:30, that's attention. And then that's when it becomes a problem. You're like, wait a minute, they're not taking my time. They're trying to take my attention away. And if I'm not paying enough attention to this, then the outcome is not going to be what I have in mind. And therefore, that's when the problems really start to show up.
No, I wonder if that's worthy of a ding, because I've never heard that before. Heighten your attention to your intention. That time blocking for a person who starts off, it heightens their attention to their intention. Have you ever said that before?
I've said it. Well, no. But I haven't said it. I haven't said it in relation to time blocking. What I've said is productivity to just to kind of give you the higher view of this. Yes. Productivity is not about efficiency and effectiveness. Right. Those are byproducts of productivity. Productivity is the active linking, and I have said this before, between your intention and your attention. That's what that is. So to that end, that's essentially what I'm talking about here. So time blocks, they give your attention a place to live.
Okay, great. So I'm going to give that a ding, because we're talking to the time blockers who are in the world, and time blockers in the world need to know that if you're just starting out time blocking, be aware that all of a sudden failure is going to become your friend, because where attention and intention were kind of mixed up and not quite clear, and you didn't really know that you weren't following your intention. All of a sudden you are now going to learn that, and you're going to realize that for the very first time. Great. So to summarize where we just sort of left off, we discovered that there's a problem that new time blockers have. They run into a whole bunch of reality where their intentions don't match their actual attention, and they come to realize this because they're keeping track of where they want to put their time. Either it could be a theme for the day that gets knocked off. It could be all the way down to the minute, that you're, for some people, oh my God, this is 5 minutes late or 5 minutes early, or I'm not following my schedule. Because there are some schools of thought that say that you need to follow your schedule no matter what. Yep. And those probably lead you to feelings of failure faster than, for example, theming, which allows you to enter it gently.
Well, and further to that, Francis, I think the biggest thing that happens is once you start using time blocking, and you realize some of the not barriers, but the not even pitfalls, but the problems, the things that show up, the concerns that you weren't aware of before. It's the stuff that we do have more agency over that you can actually start to take control of and command of. So when, things like expectation management, like you couldn't do that before. You didn't even know that you had the ability to do that, because your expectation, like there was no sense of that. You're getting all of this stuff thrown at you. And then what you can start to do is parse it out and say, okay, well, what are these external demands? I need to give them my attention, but I can't give all my attention away, because there's some internal demands which may have been given to me by others that I need to focus on. So now I need to manage expectations, so that way I can have those blocks freed up. And that's where you'll do things like, hey, the way the business runs is that we're going full guns from 9 to 3, but from 3 to 5, I'd like to block my time out where no one can. And then they go, okay. And I think that's the other problem too. And I know we might get into this, is whenever somebody adopts something new, like a new breathtaking or groundbreaking or something I've heard of, they go, all right, I'm all in. And we've seen this with Getting Things Done before. I've read the
Right.
Getting Things Done book and I'm going to do the weekly review and I'm going to da, da, da. And then all of a sudden they're like, if one thing breaks or doesn't work, it just collapses.
It just
Same
collapses.
thing with technology. They'll go,
Right.
I know the new app like Motion or ClickUp or whatever it is. They'll go, I'm going to put all my stuff in there because that will help me be more productive. And then all they've done is said, here's the pile. I'm just going to move this pile in or anything for it. And they're like, well, how come this didn't work? Well, the reason it didn't work is you don't have human driven processes in place that can work in any app, that can be future proof, that need to be adjusted. And you also tried to do it all at once. It's the same battle we hear when someone's trying to work out. If you go from not working out at all to trying to work out 7 days a week, the likelihood of failure is high. If you are trying to go from being a night owl to a morning person, you've heard 15 minutes every day, go to bed 15 minutes earlier every day. If I was going to bed at 1 in.the.morning and then said, oh, I'm going to start going to bed at 8 at night, I'm probably going to fail. So it's the same principles with time blocking. Real quick, if you're going to start with one.
Right.
And start with the one that you're going to have the most success with. Like start on a Saturday. Hey, I'm going to, when you have more agency. I think that's
6 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock at night, or pick the times that are least likely to be disturbed by emergencies, other people.
Mm-hmm.
That's great coaching, because you can tell the coach or tell the newbie or the coachee that, listen, the time is going to come when, but until that comes, here's how you get your feet wet. And you start by time blocking and theming the kinds of days and in a kind of way that allows you gentle entry, because you are about to be rudely surprised. Like, for example, speaking of expectations management, I can imagine the erstwhile time blocker saying to his boss, well, no, I can't do that. I'm time blocking between 1 and 5. And the boss goes, what? What are you talking about?
What are you talking? Yeah, or I don't answer emails after 3. They're like, no, you can't. You have to figure out where those boundaries can be built.
Oh, you mean your next job?
Yeah. Oh, not here,
job.
right?
I don't want to work in this job. You mean some other job, right?
Yeah, and I'm sure where I live, it's a capital of a province, and I've done some work with government, and you can't treat government the same way as you would treat big business, because it's so firmly entrenched and there's so much red. So you have to kind of decide. It's the same principle that, I might be going in the weeds here a little bit, but I don't like no meeting days. Because the optics of a no meeting day sounds like, what, you don't take meetings on a Wednesday? Well, who are you? But if you instead say, I don't do meetings after 3. Well, that seems more reasonable because, it's just the last 2 hours of the day. But here's the great part. If you don't do meetings after 3, 5 days a week, you get 10 hours back. Which is a whole bunch of time. Plus trying to do what if you had like a no meeting day on Wednesday? You don't really recuperate in that time. And also you're likely to let some get in there. You really are. You're more likely to let people get in on a Wednesday or that no meeting day than you would with the after 3 p.m. Right. So I don't, that's a different way of approaching it. But I think more often than not, we hear the shiny new strategy and we go, oh, I'm going all in. And the problem is, if you go all in and it's like jumping into the deep end of a pool and not knowing how to swim. You're going to have some problems.
Right. So we're coaching at this point is to find ways to learn to time block gradually, almost, because the fact is you are in a social system with other people. You have your own expectations to deal with that you don't know about. You're not very skilled at it, so you're going to fail. So here's an approach that can sort of ease you into the social challenge, the personal challenge, the expectation challenge, the planning fallacy challenge. Here are some easy methods that will ease you in. So you actually can gain some momentum, because what happens often is that people give up time blocking and then they're saying it doesn't work because their experience of it is that they had this idea of how it would work. It doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. And then they quit, and then they write a blog post that says time blocking doesn't work and here's why. Yep. And you kind of go, well, yeah, because they
It's the same, and you have to find, I know in my case, like when people have said they can't theme their days, as an example, I call BS on that, because I'll say to them, well, okay, well, when do you do your laundry? Oh, Saturday. What about your grocery shopping? Saturday. When do you mow your lawn? Saturday. I'm like, so Saturday is like a day where you do household stuff, right? Yep. So Saturday's your household day, right? Yeah. Oh, I'm like, yeah, you're already
You're
doing it to
already
a
doing it to
degree.
some
You're
degree,
already,
right?
so all I'm asking is for you to, and you probably do it like, we know what we're doing at certain times of day anyways. There's certain things that, so own that, like just take some agency over it. And
Right.
then to your point, start to see those results and go, okay, what if I go a little bit further? Like, what if I try from 3 to 5 on a Friday when everyone's out of the office and the expectations on their side are low, but I can do some of this stuff now instead of, wrapping up emails or something like that. I'm going to do that earlier in the day, and I'm going to take from 3 to 5 where I'm not interrupted. I'm going to do something that's a little bit, bigger, a little bit more in depth. But again, that's the thing. Even when business isn't personal, productivity always is. And so with that in mind, you need to kind of go, how do I work subjectively in an objective world? And time blocking does allow you to do that. But again, like anything else, and we've been talking about this, you can't jump in with both feet right away, especially because it's new and it's likely unproven to you. You need to see some of the results. And when you do, then you're going to start to add more layers to it.
Right, right, right. So this is great coaching. I've not heard this, what we're saying, ever really said before, because
Not
there's a
publicly.
we think
Maybe
it,
in our
but we don't
private
say
coaching, you're
it.
getting like free coaching right now. Like this is like we expect the hourly rate to be plugged in. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I mean,
This is
this is
insider
kind of some
baseball.
this is some of the stuff. But I think that people need to know that you can work partly, if not entirely, the way that you feel will work best for you to hit your objectives. You just need to try.
Right.
And I'm to the point of time blocking, and I know that this is something that comes up a lot. Cal Newport's talked about this too, about putting very specific tasks in very specific blocks of time. I personally am not a fan of that, because that's where I think one of the first things starts to fall apart, Francis, because something happens and they can't do that specific task. So therefore, everything else gets derailed and pushed. And then they're like, uh-oh, now I'm spending more time moving things around than doing stuff. Whereas if in my mind, it's like, okay, what if you broaden the scope a bit and say, all right, so from 9 to 10, I'm not going to send these 5 emails. I'm going to focus on email.
Email.
Or
Right.
instead of working on this project, which by the way, you might be having bottlenecks from other people, which pushes you into email. Now you're checking email. You say, I'm going to focus on all the things that I can do in Salesforce. Oh, and
Right.
here they all are. This is why when people put their tasks in their calendar and they don't have a to-do list, I'm like, you should really have a to-do list too. They're like, why? Like, because the calendar offers the directory of your day, the to-do list offers the details. So
Right.
if the calendar is the place where like, oh, from this time to this time, I should be paying attention to this kind of stuff. What's the stuff? Oh, the to-do list tells me the stuff. And then you draw lines. So if you have a Salesforce block between 9 and 11, then in your to-do list application, you use a tag called Salesforce. You click on that tag and you see every task that says Salesforce, and they could be for one project, 3 projects, 5 different projects, and then you're in that modality of Salesforce, which helps you get into flow, right? Because that's
Right.
what time blocking can do, is it can
Right.
get you into flow. And then all of a sudden, when you're done that time block, not only did you stick with the time block because you did all the Salesforce stuff, you moved 1, 3, 5 projects forward. That's a massive dopamine. That's like, holy crap, I moved those things forward. And then all of a sudden, when your boss says, well, how are those things going? You can at least say confidently, well, I've updated everything in Salesforce for it. And that's huge, as opposed to either trying to work sequentially in a project where bottlenecks can show up, or just saying, I'm going to work on this very specific task. Uh-oh, this came up. So I think that there's give and take, and there's a relationship between your to-do list and your calendar. And to forsake one
Right. It's
is
not,
it can
doesn't
it's
mean that,
detrimental. It's detrimental. It's detrimental.
right,
If you're strictly a to-do list person, you also need a calendar, because the
right,
calendar will tell you, oh shoot, I can't do that right now because I have a meeting with Francis, or this is not the right time to do it because my kids are home from school and I should not be recording a podcast on a Saturday, right? So those two things need to work together, and when they do, that's when you go from doing productive to being productive.
right. And I think also there's a initial kind of, I won't call it a hyperbole, but there's a belief that people have that if they start time blocking, it should solve problems like the ones that we are describing so far.
Mm-hmm.
This should be the holy grail, only to find out, because their idea of time blocking, it's a philosophical problem, isn't the one that they are actually experiencing. They're experiencing practical problems, but they
Mm-hmm.
bought into it at this philosophical level, and they don't really know whether the philosophy, they start to question the philosophy and
No.
to question their belief and question themselves. And we're here, I guess we're saying that you should question the philosophy, but the way to question it is with specific practice, not necessarily to ask, does the overall idea work, but is there a way to implement it that actually works for me and my circumstances? And if you can't find that, well, let's talk about that. So if you
Yeah.
can't find solutions like that, and you never really get to solve, the problems that you experience once you start blocking lots of tasks, it could be that you give up on the technique altogether. You say it doesn't work. You switch back to whatever you were doing before. Like I said, you write a blog post that say it doesn't work. And that's what some people do. They go back to, they get convinced that this is a better technique, more effectiveness and more efficiency. They try it and then they give up. But to me, that's a tragedy, because I think there's empirical proof that says that I think there is research proof that says a task in a calendar is more likely to be accomplished than a task in a list only.
That's the key. Only. I think that the problem with most to-do lists, especially, is that people work them sequentially. So they work them either by like how were they written down? Your
Right.
brain does not write things down in the order that they're supposed to be done.
Right.
It just doesn't. That's not the way the brain works.
It just
And
captures.
so this is it. So then what's the second way that they look at the to-do list? The due date. Well, the problem with due dates is we often overestimate what we can do in a day and underestimate what we can do over a longer stretch of time. So now all of a sudden you've overwhelmed yourself with, not only do I have all these tasks here and I have to scan to figure out which ones to do. Now there's 43 of them that are due today. But are they due today? Well, I think, oh, no, I can get them done today. That's the second. Then the third problem, real quick, is then they put them in a project, and the project also is made up of a list of things that are done sequentially. So now all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, what pieces of the project need to be done? Or worse, they have a task on their list that's actually a project, and they haven't broken it down. So now all of a sudden I tell them, and this is where this is the spiral. Okay. Oh, you've got work on report. Well, is that something that you can get done today? Well, no, there's a lot of steps to it. Okay, we'll break down the steps. But now I'm going to have more things on my list. No, you're not. You're just going to see them all. Like you're taking invisible and making it visible, and then you can make dents in it. But they're seeing this and their brain goes, oh my goodness, look at all these things. Same amount, just broken down. Better verbs, better ways to move it forward. The third thing, the fourth thing rather, is they'll use priority levels. And you and I both know, after having studied this for a while, that if you have more than one priority, then you have zero, right? Like that's what it means. Greg McKeown talked about this in his book, Essentialism. Merlin Mann, who's one of the early, pioneers of online productivity, talked about this. Like prioritization needs to be reined in. If you're watching this, I've got a bunch of Lego figures behind me. And one of them is Syndrome from the Incredibles movie. And his evil plan was to make everybody a superhero, because his quote is, if everyone's super, no one is.
No one is super.
And that's what happens if you make everything a priority, or 3 or 4 or 5 things a priority. Then what is it? Like your job should be to filter this. Time blocks help you filter, right? Because you're adding another element to it. It's Wednesday between 10 and 11. And this is when I work on this. The problem is if you go too narrow, then that's another barrier. So
Different
you have
barrier.
to figure out your Goldilocks factor. What's just right for you? And
Right.
that's why, and you and I have had this conversation offline before, when someone says like, what app should I use? Because they want it done for them, right? Like, what's the app I should use? I'm
Right.
like, I don't know.
That's the
And they're like,
wrong, it's
but you're
absolutely the wrong question.
you're like, but you're the expert. I'm like, yeah, but do you like analog or digital? Do you work like we know what questions to ask, but even then, aesthetically, we don't know what they're going to like. We also don't know how they're breaking down their tasks in the first place. We don't know if they like to use due dates or start. Like, there's so many variables. And I will say that. So as you're listening to this or hearing this, you're like, okay, Mike, so really it's a lost cause. No, because you have enough time until your time is done. Time moves on whether we want it to or not. When we're done, we're done. So you can leverage that. That's what you have to keep in mind. Not, I have to get this done today. When you learn to meditate, you're not trying to win meditation or get meditation done. It's the practice of meditation.
The practice, right.
And what I teach is called time crafting, is that you're always crafting your time. Time blocking plays a role in that, or in my case, where I talk about time theming, it plays a role in that, because a craftsperson never says, well, I'm done. That's it. Like, an actor will never go, I'm not. Like, a craftsperson will constantly be working on their craft. And
Right.
that's what you're doing with time. And if you do that and you know that and you understand that, then you know that this is going to be a continuous process and practice that leads to progress, as opposed to a one and done solution. Because if that's what you're looking for, you're not going to get it.
Right. No, this strikes me that as you're talking about the different ways of prioritizing, that when someone, for example, has picked up GTD as a solution, and GTD says only use contexts.
Yep.
And basically nothing else. And GTD says do not do time blocking because that's a bad idea and it won't work. Basically, it's very clear about that.
Yep.
But what happens is that when you use a solution like GTD and you don't do any prioritization, is that you end up, you use the word visible versus invisible. I would say visible versus mental, because you still have the attributes in your head about which tasks are more important, which will take longer, which have due dates. It's just that, to take your point, you're not putting them out there in front of you where you can manage them. You're keeping them all up here where you can't manage them very effectively. If all you manage is context, then that's not a rich enough, for most people, not a rich enough way of prioritizing or choosing.
Well, contexts are a filter. That's the thing. People, once they understand what that is. So the way I believe here, let me give you an example of, if you're going to start time blocking today, like time blocking, let's not even say theming. What you should do is sit down with a blank sheet of paper and just brain dump a GTD term. Just get the things out of your head that are there. Do not censor yourself during this process, because the things that are in your mind, you may have written them down already. They may be in motion. But that's not the point. The point is, to your point, Francis, the things that are top of mind or that are in your mind that show up as redundant, those are things that are really holding, like, they're the things you're holding on to, and you need to get those blocked. So that's what, so write them down, then assess it, then audit it and go, oh, I already have that in Todoist, or I already have that in. Oh, that's the clue. The clue is my brain, even though it knows it's written down, it doesn't trust that I'm going to do it. So therefore,
it's not where I can see it in a calendar.
It's not where I can,
or it's not in a time slot that, to take your point, it's not in a time slot that I trust that I can defend.
It's not in defend and pay attention to.
And pay attention to.
Right. I get, because you can't, everything that's going on in here, you can't. That's why people, we talked about time blocking not working for people. I don't know how many people I've come across that says, oh, I can't meditate, it doesn't work for me. Like, how do you know? They're like, well, because, I try, my mind is going the whole time. Like, that's the purpose. The purpose of it is to do it consistently to the point where you're okay with that, because that's what the brain does. And so the bottom line is things bubble to the surface, they rise to, and by the way, meditation doesn't have to be, I'm sitting in a room with dark room with candles. Meditation could be running, going for a walk. There's lots of different ways to do it. But my point is that if you're looking at this sheet of paper where you've written everything down and you
Right.
go, oh, it's already in ClickUp. Guess what? You need to put that in your calendar to say work on X, or not work, because that's a terrible verb, but like write 500 words for book. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, that's the block. And then figure out what block of time you need to do that, right? Start there. And by the way, here's the thing. Don't look at the 20 things that are done and go, well, I better get all 20 of these things done this week. Go to the next week and block. Like, don't just start with one week. Spread it out. When I help people theme their time and give daily themes, they go, okay, I'm ready to start. I'm like, great, let's go 4 weeks down the line. They're like, what?
They're like, what?
I go, and they show me their calendar while they do it. And I say, because look, and as you make your way 3 to 4 weeks down the line, the calendar gets emptier and emptier and emptier. And the only things that stand out are the certainties for every week, like the Monday stand-up meeting, the Thursday, trainer appointment. I go, this is the purest that your calendar is ever going to get. So let's theme this. That way we know, oh, Monday is a meeting. We know there's a meeting on Monday at this time. So we don't probably want to have that as a deep work day, let's say. So it gives us more information. But most people, when they time block or start this, not only do they try to do too much all at once, but they try to cram it into a week and then go, well, it didn't work this week. Spread it out. Spread it out.
So starting from the future, because the future is more defensible.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
Arguably, there's not drama and emergence is happening in the future, and you can tell people around you that, listen, I've blocked out 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Wednesday in 3 weeks time to do this particular thing.
Yep.
People could say, oh, okay, oh yeah, okay. So I'll schedule my emergency for you for Tuesday.
Yeah.
Not the Wednesday.
Well, and that's the thing, right?
You got them thinking, right?
Well, and there's tools that will help you with this. Like if you decide ultimately that you want to take more control over your time, and Cal Newport talks about this in his book, A World Without Email. And you and I both have done this, is get a calendaring program that allows people to block time with you and say, okay, well, you want to have a meeting, and then protect the time that you want to protect,
right?
And share the link. Because here's the thing is people go, oh, I'm, forget the ego of like, oh, who am I to have a scheduling link? First off, lots more people have them now. Don't worry. You're not like trying to be an elitist when you're doing something like this. I don't buy that. If you have an assistant, I find that to be a little bit more like, oh, well, to my assistant. You don't even, I don't think people need to even do that to have assistants anymore. They could personally respond and say, hey, here, or they could have somebody respond. But anyway, the point is give them the link. And when you give them the link, you're not saying, I only give you these dates. What you're giving them is the power to choose over the time that you have. They don't know what you're doing. They're not going to look at, well, look at all this time this person's not available. I mean, if you have hardly any time available, maybe, but you're going to have a balanced approach where it's like, oh, I could choose from 9 to noon on Monday, from 9 to noon on Tuesday, from 9. And they're like, wow, look at all the time that Francis and Mike are giving me to choose from. They're not thinking about it inversely, because you've given them, you've empowered them. And what you've really done is also empowered yourself at the same time. Right. Plus, you've avoided the email back. Plus, you've avoided the email back and forth. You've avoided the whole like, here, just feel free to and nothing drives me nuts more than people who say, within organizations, one of the first things I tell people, organizations, to do is do not allow people to schedule things on your calendar. Don't turn that off, because you could wake up the next morning and your day's full.
Right. And you have had no time to get out of bed and even check your email yet.
Yep. Exactly.
So the social side of time blocking, you mentioned this business about meditation being about the chaos in your mind and noticing it. So the analogy I'm drawing then is that time blocking is the practice of time blocking is about now becoming very aware of the chaos in your commitments, as it relates to social with other people, as it relates to your own expectations. And the idea is to confront it and keep practicing so that you get better, as opposed to giving up and saying it doesn't work. It's a different mindset to bring to it. That's great. All right. So people who try and go back to old solutions, it won't work for them, because this really is a matter of growth towards something that you have to contend with. You can't avoid time if you're managing lots of tasks. And as your volume grows, you have less free time. So you're moving towards having less and less and less discretionary time and time that's absolutely free. We're talking about pretty intricate subjects, so Mike, why is it that this problem hasn't been sort of tackled the way we're talking about? Why aren't more people talking about what we're talking about on this call? Why is that a popular way of thinking about the problem?
Well, number one, I think technology's played a huge role in it. The idea that because we have all these tools, we can do more. But the problem is that the tools can only do so much, right? I would argue, for example, let's use Inbox Zero as an example, that email, the way email was created and utilized, there's no user manual. There's no best practices for email. We would have been better off with this. Like, okay, so if this is urgent, we send an instant message. We don't send an email.
Right.
If this is related to a task, that it goes inside of our task management system as a comment, as opposed to an email about the task, right? So there needs to be like a charter or almost like a standard of practices around these things. And really, when it comes to productivity, I think people are still measuring it and in a quantitative manner without thinking about the qualitative aspects.
Right.
So
agree. Email was built when we got, when our programs announced to us that we got mail.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the 90s, when we came home and we told our friends that we got an email.
Yeah, it was the novelty of it. It was amazing. Yeah. And now it's the bane of our existence. And the way that we measure productivity, a lot of people measure it. And we've seen this, again, back to Merlin Mann, whose intent, I am certain, was not to say Inbox Zero is the goal. First off, his definition of Inbox Zero, if you look it up, is not get your email to zero. It's go into email with nothing waiting for you that you don't already have a sense of, right? Like, so don't go it, like, basically when you leave email, you should have everything handled, everything everything in a good place. Peace. Right.
Not open-ended things not hanging out there waiting to come and bite you.
Well, and that's the thing, is the reason that Inbox Zero has been kind of corrupted to this, I got my email to zero today, therefore I was productive, is because it's a measurable quantity. I had 3,600 emails. Now my inbox is at zero. I had 230 emails come in today and I got them all done. I'm at zero. Yeah, but what about the Salesforce updates? Oh, I didn't get that done. Why? Because there's no red dot, there's no urgency, and urgency. The thing about emails, much like social media, is if you get your email to zero and 40% of them are autoresponders, copies, newsletters, you still get that little dopamine like you would on social media by just checking your DMs and stuff like that. So your brain is going, thanks for the dopamine. But then all of a sudden, the disappointment of not getting those bigger things done is a problem. So I think the reason we're not having these discussions is, number one, the definition of productivity has been skewed. Now, interestingly, I think the pandemic has started to correct this a little bit. The pause that we had, again, not at all, kind of downplaying the tragic elements of the pandemic, but I would say that COVID-19, the pandemic, has accelerated things that were going to happen anyways, remote work, for example, things like that, but also has kind of altered what people are thinking about, like, hey, I don't have to try to get all these things done in a day, or, wow, look, I'm spending time doing some deeper work on things and I'm seeing the results. So and the way you attack this problem is not by, going in, full bore. You have to be strategic about it. This is not all out assault. This is a chess match. It's a check. Like, you have to, and some people are not going to be willing to make those changes because, or at least they're going to be they'll have to be led that way because the measurables are numerical, right? Like, it's affecting our bottom line. It's affecting our bottom line. But qualitative work helps the bottom line in ways that you can't immediately measure. So if you start to block out, and that's why, companies are doing things like, again, no meeting days. It's a valiant effort, but you may need to tweak that. It may not be something that's permanent, or using actual task management tools instead of email to deal with tasks, and then finding the outliers that are just not going along with it. And by the way that you deal with that as a last resort is you leave those people out in the cold. I've had clients where they're like, the people are consistently emailing and they're not checking their task management app, and they're being called to the carpet by their bosses. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, you're supposed to be using this task app and you keep emailing tasks, and that's why they're not getting done. So you need to get on board or get out. And I mean, that sucks, but it's the only way that we can kind of alter the importance of, again, being productive over, quote, doing productive. And real quick, you're always going to have these people in here that are, again, with remote work, especially in mind, there's always going to be people that will do busy work and confuse it with productivity. And that's going to happen. I mean, it's an animal kingdom thing. There's ants in an ant colony that are called lounger ants, and they literally go along with the colony looking as if they're doing something, but they are not contributing at all. So if the insect world has it, the human world will have it too. And the whole goal is, if you know, it's again, what is it? The Pareto principle, right? The 80-20 rule, right? Like let those 20% that are not doing, let them flounder. If that's the case, until they get along. Don't punish the 80% by saying, hey, we all have to come back to the office because, I need to see you all working.
Right.
And, as opposed to same thing with using a task app and things like that. So leaders are going to have to start looking at this a bit differently. And that can start with us. It can start with you blocking out like 2 hours at the end of every day. And then your leadership team going, wow, how in the world are you getting all this stuff done? Like, how are you? Well, I block out 2 hours every day at the end of the day for uninterrupted work. Wow, maybe everybody should do that. Wouldn't be a bad idea, boss. Things like that.
You hit on an interesting point when you mentioned technology. The technology doesn't support us in the direction that we're going. And email is a great example, because email was using email the way we're using it today is a bit like carrying a megaphone to a meeting. It's a technology that doesn't really belong in that space, but we are funneling all of our 95% of our messages through a channel that it's not meant to handle.
Right.
The people on the other side aren't trained to give you only what they should be giving you by email. The channel itself allows for anything to be sent, which is its power and its downfall. Ties you to the inbox, which means you have to keep checking all the time, because it's where most of it is coming through.
Yep.
And even doing something like time blocking your time to process email is in some companies forbidden. You can't do that.
Yep. Which is ridiculously silly.
There's weird in most companies, like, oh my God, he only checks email between certain hours.
Have you heard of the stack method, by the way? Have you heard of the stack method? The email, it's fantastic. You should, if in show notes, link to the stack method. It's a fantastic email workflow that has been built by Prasant Nair, who I interviewed for my podcast. The episode hasn't aired yet, won't air for a little while, but you would love it, because he explains the way he's just tackling the email problem, which we're talking about right now. And he's using examples that, like, you'll watch it and you'll probably have this one like, yeah, like the same examples some of the stuff you just talked about, some of the stuff I've talked about, you can go, aha, this guy gets it. This guy gets it. And he does, but he also presents it in a way that I think organizations could get on board with, because he's found, like, I think, a way to maintain email workflow without being overly, it doesn't have to be too, it's not overly like I have to move things around all the time. He's got like very specific ways, but it can expand and shrink as you need. But to your point, the example I always use when it comes to email and using it in this manner is, and again, this does relate to time blocking too, is how many times do you go and check your physical mailbox every day? Like, how many times do you go check the mail where once, right? Once. The mailman only comes, or the letter carrier only comes once per day. And generally, when they come, if they've been doing the same route long enough.
Right.
That's the first thing. So you're only checking it once a day. I'm not suggesting you should check email once a day. What I'm saying is that, like, email was initially meant to replace memos and letters and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So then the second thing is, when you get your letter mail, Francis, I'll ask you, once you check your letter mail, do you look at it and then just put it back in the mailbox?
Back in the mailbox.
Do you?
No,
Of course not.
It's the same story we're telling.
It's the same story with email. It's like, okay, let me look at this. Oh, I'm going to mark it as unread. Mark it as unread. Now, again, I've been in this game long enough to know that if you know that mark as unread means that it's something you need to deal with, that's fine. I'm not saying it's the best solution, especially if you've got hundreds that are marked as unread. I'd rather have you move them to something else, not called inbox. But the point is, if you start to think about email in the same way you think about letter mail, you're going to realize how ridiculous it is that you've been dealing with email. And so will your bosses and things like that. So the stack method's fantastic. I mean, we all have different ways of handling email, but the point is, to your point, is saying, and in the stack method, he actually says, I have 2 times a day that I check email, and he blocks time for that.
Right.
And that to me is one way to do it. But also, let's say you've got that one, let's say your boss is somebody who is relentless with email. The best way to handle something like that is you create an email folder called boss. And when an email comes from your boss in your inbox, you just drag that email to that boss folder. Don't answer it right away, or create a, but that can break too. You could have a filter, but what if they're sending it from an email that you haven't necessarily? So sometimes, and by the way, the manual practice of it is, I think, a better one to start with, right? Then once you're done checking your inbox, your brain goes, oh, I better see what the boss wants, right? Because that's a human reaction. Oh, the boss folder tells me what the boss wants. And then you deal with those. And then that's your cycle. Sure, you can't change the behavior of the boss, but you can change how you react to that behavior. And then you could do silly things if you wanted to, like go, I'm not going to respond to that email right now and see what the boss does. Like, you could do things like that, but you can't do it if everything's in your inbox, because your inbox is like, it's literally a loading zone. There's no rhyme or reason or definition to it. So you have to define anything that you're working with, including time blocks, whether it's very specific or broad enough that you can fit enough in it so that you know that, oh, I'm going to be able to use this time block effectively. Same thing with email. So yeah, you could have an email time block, but then I would encourage you to figure out how to best leverage that time block in a way so that you can only have 1 or 2, as opposed to having you get pinged by email all day long.
Right. Well, the challenge is that the tools that you need to use for time blocking don't support time blocking. They're not friendly to your objective. So once you make the switch from not time blocking to time blocking, you're all of a sudden going to realize that my calendar isn't made for this. My email inbox is not made for this. My to-do list isn't made for this. My social circles aren't made for this.
No, and you have to.
Both sides.
It's like I grew up in an era where the Transformers were like a big cartoon, and Voltron and all that stuff. It's like all of those. Voltron was like the 4 or 5 lions or whatever, right? They individually were pretty powerful, but when they formed together to be like Voltron, unstoppable. Right. That's the same thing here. So your calendar, your email, to-do list, when all speaking the same language, right? You're going to be so yes. So again, it's like, to give a really interesting example, your calendar is not made to time block specifically, because where do you put the tasks? They don't really, there's no right, like you'd have to put them in the description, or maybe you have like to-dos inside of it or whatever, but very rarely. So what do? Well, the calendar says it's email time. Okay, great. I have a to-do list item that says check email. So therefore that, or emails I need to send, and you go to the email tag and you see all the emails you need to send. So that way you go into email with missions rather than questions, because that's always a better way to go in. And then you open up your email and you see all that, you send those emails, and then your email inbox has all these things. You're like, oh, emails from the boss. Well, there's the boss folder. I'm going to move that to that folder, and I'm going to keep going through. That's how you do it, because the calendar says the block of time is for email. The to-do list says, here's the emails that I know I want to send. And then the email says, here's how I manage the inflow so that the hundreds and hundreds of people that email one person aren't overwhelming me in a way that I have to constantly be reacting to these things, so that the next time the email time block comes up, I can go back in and deal with it again. That's how that works.
That should be one seamless activity where, for example, the inbox should be blocked. The inbox should be hidden from view. Because if you're going in to send emails, you don't want to be distracted by what came in 5 minutes ago. That's now going to take up 3 hours of your distracted time. So it should, the three tools should present you with like, and we're getting into solutions now. So this, we've done this, but solutions now would be the kind of software that is fit for purpose, not fit for this purpose, that one, and this one. And then you got to put them together. And when you put them together, they're actually not made to work together. They're not helpful to you as a time blocker. You've got to now be so disciplined that when you use them, you only do this when you're in this mode. You only do that in that mode. You only, so you're having to generate all of the discipline that should be built into the software, right?
Right. But the tools allow to make that easier. And that's why when someone says to me, well, how do I know I'm just using my to-do list and my to-do list has due dates and like Apple reminders? Let's use that as an example. Until they've added tags to Apple reminders, it was really not that good for this sort of thing. And I would argue it still isn't. It's not meant for this kind of stuff. Even Francesco's new the Bento app, it's not meant for that either. We're talking about SchedPal, ClickUp, Asana, Todoist, like anything that has some way for you to tag or create a connection to your calendar and then whatever it is you're supposed to be working with. So, I mean, I'll use examples like the time you need, the resource, the energy, the activity, whatever. You need to be able to connect those dots quickly so that when you're like, oh, it's writing time. Oh, okay. Todoist says, here's all my writing tasks across multiple projects. Let me look. Oh, and so let me work on those. Like that's just a quick connection. But if it's like, I need, and I'll use theming as an example here. It's 2:00 on a Wednesday. That's my writing time. What's my writing project I'm trying to work on? What's my project I'm working on right now? Well, this month's project is the procrastination course. Okay, let me go into the procrastination course inside of ClickUp, see all the tasks that are associated with writing with it, and let's go. So the human cannot be removed from this, and the discipline's required, but you have to have a tool that will help remove the friction that can show up because there's that primitive part of your brain that wants to go, yeah, but email will tell me what to do, or Facebook, what about that? Like you need to have some form of direction. And that's what these, again, it's all about directing your attention. And if you have the path to least resistance set up, then your time blocks will work, but you have to, they require, it's like a gardener. You have to constantly be weeding and cultivating and feeding the soil so that the plants will actually grow and you'll get a great harvest.
Right. Given the tools that we have today.
Yep.
I think this is the message for anybody who, particularly if you're new to time blocking, is that we've talked about all the different ways in which you may have understood time blocking before you started. You started off too hot and heavy. You started off too quickly because you didn't really have a gradual way of getting into the challenges it presents. As you get into the challenges you present, you realize that the social set, the people who are around you and your expectations aren't aligned with what you want to accomplish. And as you start to put the tools together and start to use them, they don't talk to each other. They're not concerned about your time blocks. They're concerned about other things. And you have to kind of, as you said, you have to keep crafting it and working it so that it actually accomplishes your goals. And this is the bad news of time blocking, is that, my goodness, you commit to it. And as you commit to it, you are forced to become the architect.
It's a lifestyle. It becomes a lifestyle. Here's the thing. And I was just thinking about this before we hopped on our call today, because I've been working out, and working out is a lifestyle. Eating healthy, I don't like the term diet in that, like the quick, like I'm going on a diet to lose weight. Like a diet technically should be like, this is the diet that I have in my life, and this is what I do. Now, what's interesting, and this is, I would challenge you, like if you are somebody like me or Francis, have been time blocking for a while or using these kind of processes, I think it's important to have a cheat day. I do. Like, I'm not saying it should be during the work week, but maybe on a Saturday, you don't time block at all, because that will actually help with the discipline in a way. Think of it. It's the same thing with eating healthy. Like you've heard, have a cheat day. Like, oh, it's my cheat day. Like it's something to actually look forward to. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should do it right away. If you're new to time blocking, don't go, well, here's my cheat day and move the cheat day around. Like that's what you wouldn't do that with a physical routine or workout anyway. But there's something, but if the discipline needs a bit of a breather too, right? So if you know that, hey, every Sunday, like Sunday, I love watching the Cincinnati Bengals play football when it's going on. So
Sure.
I will do things like watch the videos of past seasons. Like I will do, but Sunday is Sunday's not my cheat. Saturday is right now my cheat day, but Sunday would be like the day where I'm like, I don't theme, right? Like, and actually I've had it on Friday before because Friday is a day where no one really wants to work. So I'm like, I'm free to do whatever I want on Friday. That doesn't mean I all of a sudden go through my to-do list in a sequential order. I
Right.
still look at it and I'm like, well, what do I feel like doing right now? I don't know. I'm tired. Let me look at all my low energy tasks. Okay, bang, 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 bang. I'll do those, right? But I'm not beholden to what's today's focus, right? It's more like I just use the to-do list at that point as a directory, right? But the
Right.
calendar tells me, hey, Mike, it's your cheat day. It's free day. It's free day Friday. Great. I can do whatever I want that day, but whatever I want is in the to-do list. Like it really is because I use it. So I think that's worth keeping in mind too. This is not a and I've had this happen before. People have said, Mike, your system, it's like time crafting and time blocking. It sounds so rigid. Like,
Right.
so like,
It's hard.
yeah, it can be, but it doesn't have to be. I would say initially it's there's some rigidity at first because you're not used to it. You know what I mean? There's some constraints there, but frameworks foster freedom, right? So
Right.
if you have a framework in place and you have it long enough, you're like, I don't need to follow it today because I'll be able to pick it back up the next day. That's why, theming days is helpful for me because if I'm sick on a Thursday and Thursday is my training day, my brain doesn't go, well, when am I going to do all this training stuff? Well, next Tuesday, because Tuesday is also a training day. So don't worry about it. Well, what can I do today? Well, you're kind of tired and sick. So do all your low energy stuff. Oh, okay. Bang, bang, bang. So I, I don't, I have those there as attention points. That's what they're designed to do. That's what these blocks are designed to do. That's what themes are designed to do. And by having one day a week where I'm not beholden to that, it actually strengthens the other days
Other day.
that much more.
It's kind of like your days off from the gym make you better in the gym.
Yeah.
Because it needs the rest day to recover from the challenge of working out.
Yeah. And what's hilarious is that I didn't have that for the longest time. I didn't. I was like, every day is themed and I was relentless about it. And the only reason I recognized I needed one is I journal. I mean, I journal as part of my evening routine every night. I'm like, why am I like, I just feel like I'm constantly like I'm getting the right things done, but when am I going to get a break? And I'm like, wait a minute, why don't I just give myself a break? Like I could do that. And I just recalibrated and I'm like, every Friday, which is, like we're recording this on a Wednesday and 2 days from now, I'm free to do whatever I want and but the great thing is whatever I want to do, I know where to find it. I think that's the
Right.
other thing too. You have to know where to find this stuff.
It's not
And right.
randomly hitting you all from any part
And
of the
you've done
world.
right. And we've done this long enough now, both you and I, to know that the places where we can find it, reason we know to look there is because we've used them. So we trust them.
Right.
And the only way time blocking sticks is if you put them in places that you can trust and you do it over consistent. That's why I said, look 4 weeks down. Don't just like make that list 20, whatever it shows up that's redundant, block out time, but not just this week. Maybe only pick 2 blocks this week, but go like 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks down the road. Yeah, work backwards. Yeah, and in fact, you could even get to the point where you're like, well, what's the least important stuff? Let me go 6 weeks down the road and put it there, and grade it to like, oh, the most important stuff needs to go this week, right? Or the most urgent stuff rather, right?
Due date on it. That's this week.
Right. Yeah,
Actually,
exactly. But just know this: you will never stop crafting your time, including your time blocks, until you have no more time blocks to craft because you're just you've ascended to a higher plane where your to-do list and your calendar and all that stuff doesn't really matter anymore. It's just who you were, who you became that does, right? So just keep that in mind. Like I know we live in a society that's like live for today because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. I'm not crapping on that at all. I think that's important, but just remember that there's only so much you can do in a day, in a week, in a month. And there's this great book by Dr. Henry Cloud called Necessary Endings. And he uses the metaphor of a rose bush, which I think is brilliant because you have to cut healthy blooms on a rose bush so that others can look amazing. You could have an okay rose bush, but it's going to be crowded with flowers. They won't stand out. So healthy things need to be pruned so that way the rose bush can thrive. And it's the same thing here. So there's going to be things where you're like, I really want to do this week, but it's not the best week to do it. So I'm going to leave it to the next week. Or so keep that in mind. You're always going to be crafting your time. You're never going to stop. Once you stop crafting your time, then you are giving your time away, and you don't want to do that.
That's going back into the past. So Mike, how can, as we wrap up, we have some awesome conclusions and advice for people as they get into time blocking and as they start to grow as time blockers. We've given them, I think, insights I've not heard anywhere else with respect to here's what happens once you get on this path. It's not as bad as you think. It also requires a whole lot of nuance and a whole lot of strategy. How can folks hear more about the work that you're doing in time crafting, time theming, and productivity is podcast?
Well, if you want to keep up with my work and just get you'll get regular emails from me and so on and so forth. Go to productivityist.com/do. So do. And you'll get a what I call the starting six. And I think what I like about it is it's both qualitative and quantitative. It's a worksheet that you can use. And then you'll start to get some insights and advice from me on how to leverage that kind of stuff, how to theme your time, how to operate by mode more than say by project, like different lenses with which to look through your intentions so you can pay more attention to them. And again, if my podcast is A Productive Conversation, which you can check out. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. And yeah, I mean, I think the best place to go just to get started is with the starting six at productivityist.com/do.
There's how many do's and be's in there? Two do's and two be's?
Do. So there's, I think it's 2 B's and 3 do's, right? Think of like do. There you go.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's right. Excellent. It's great having you on the podcast. You will be back.
Yes.
We love pick another topic and habit it, because there's these kind of conversations they get to places that people just don't get to hear and understand, because we're going into depth in something that they're dealing with, problems that they're having in this one specific area. And boy, I'm trusting that folks, if you're listening, that you got value. But keep listening. I'm going to tell you about the next podcast in the series episode that follows this one in just a few minutes, plus give you a few more announcements. So keep listening.
Thanks for having me, Francis. I had a blast.
Thanks, Mike. Take care.
Here's a clip from our next episode. Committed and you're a hard worker, you're smart, someone who is really looking to get to the next levels of achievement. Because the number of tasks that you can manage effectively is a limit, a real ceiling on what you can accomplish as an individual. And if you want to accomplish and reach your potential and surpass what people believe you can accomplish or what you believe you can accomplish, there's no doing that without contending with, how do I manage my tasks? And if you want to leave a comment about this episode or any aspect of the work that we're doing here at the Task Management and Time Blocking Podcast, you can go over to www.replytofrancis.info and send me either a message by text or send me a voice message, a voice note. And as you probably know, we have a couple of places that you can interact with other people, talk about this episode. One is at the community, mightytaskers.scheduleu.org, and you'll see the link in the show notes. And the other, of course, is our upcoming Task Management and Time Blocking Summit coming up in March. 2 outstanding opportunities to interact with other people about the ideas that you've heard on this podcast or any of our episodes that are coming up. And if you'd like to support the work we're doing, I invite you to click on the Patreon link below to make a donation. And please don't forget to like our show and recommend it to others on iTunes, Stitcher, Google, or whatever podcast app or service you're using. This is Francis Wade. I'm signing out. I hope to see you on a future episode. And until then, take care and all the best. See you later.